The teacup trembles, just slightly, barely perceptible to anyone who isn't looking closely, but he is always looking closely. The afternoon light filters through heavy velvet curtains, casting shadows across the drawing room where Eleanor Ashford sits, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, eyes downcast. The picture of Victorian propriety, the embodiment of dutiful submission, or so it seems. What happens when silence becomes a weapon, when obedience transforms into strategy, when a woman in the most restrictive era of modern history discovers that her greatest power lies not in resistance, but in appearing powerless? This is not a story about rebellion. This is something far more dangerous. England, 1887, the heart of the Victorian era, where women exist as decorative objects in their husbands' homes, their worth measured in silence and submission, where a woman's thoughts are considered dangerous, her opinions irrelevant, her very personhood negotiable. The corset is not just a garment, it is a philosophy, restriction as virtue, confinement as love. Eleanor Ashford married Charles Ashford 3 years ago, a match celebrated by society. He, a prominent banker with political aspirations, she, the daughter of a declining aristocratic family, beautiful and educated just enough to be interesting at dinner parties, but not enough to be threatening. The transaction was simple: her family's name for his money, her body for his legacy, her complete erasure for his comfort. The manipulation began on their wedding night, not with violence, though that would come later in subtler forms. It began with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials embossed in gold. "For your thoughts, my dear," Charles said, his smile warm, his eyes calculating. "I want to know everything about you. A marriage should have no secrets." Eleanor thanked him. She wrote in it dutifully, pleasant observations about the weather, gratitude for his generosity, admiration for his intelligence. Nothing real, nothing true. She had learned early that when a man says he wants to know everything, what he means is he wants to control everything. Information is ammunition. Vulnerability is weakness. Truth is danger. The journal disappeared from her nightstand after 2 weeks. She never mentioned it. He never returned it. The message was clear. He would monitor. She would comply. This was the foundation of their marriage. Charles Ashford is a master manipulator. He never raises his voice. Violence, he understands, leaves marks that society might notice. Instead, he employs more sophisticated weapons: concern, protection, love. He worries about her health, insisting she stay home from social engagements. He fears for her safety, requiring her to account for every moment outside his presence. He loves her too much to see her upset, so he manages her relationships, deciding which friends are appropriate, which family members she may visit. Each restriction comes wrapped in affection, each boundary presented as care. When Eleanor's sister visits and leaves in tears after Charles subtly insults her throughout dinner, he holds Eleanor afterward and whispers, "I only want what's best for you. Your sister has always been jealous of your happiness. I'm protecting you from her poison." When Eleanor expresses interest in the women's education movement, Charles laughs gently and touches her cheek. "My brilliant girl, that's what I love about you, such fascinating thoughts. But you don't need that world. You have me. I can teach you anything worth knowing." When Eleanor grows quiet over dinner, withdrawing into herself, Charles becomes deeply concerned. He summons doctors. They diagnose her with hysteria, that convenient catch-all for female discontent. The prescription is rest, isolation, and complete dependence on her husband's judgment. Charles administers her laudanum personally, always the devoted husband, always in control. To the outside world, Charles and Eleanor are the perfect couple. He is attentive, generous, utterly devoted. She is gracious, elegant, appropriately grateful. They attend church together. They host dinner parties where Eleanor plays the piano beautifully and speaks only when spoken to. She manages the household with quiet efficiency. She never contradicts him. She never complains. She is, by all Victorian measures, the ideal wife. But something is happening beneath that porcelain surface, something Charles cannot see because he has made the fatal error that all manipulators eventually make. He has mistaken silence for stupidity, compliance for defeat, submission for surrender. Eleanor is watching. She has always been watching. In her silence, she catalogues everything. The way Charles's mood darkens when his business ventures struggle. The pattern of his cruelty, always escalating before important social events, as if he needs to diminish her to feel powerful. The specific triggers that cause his mask to slip. The lies he tells others about his life, his success, his marriage. She files it all away with the precision of a scholar, the patience of a strategist. She discovers his private correspondence by accident, not the innocent accident he will later believe, but the calculated accident she has engineered by deliberately misplacing his reading glasses so he leaves his study unlocked while searching for them. The letters reveal everything: financial irregularities at the bank, debts to dangerous men, a mistress in Cheapside who is demanding more money, and most importantly, correspondence with Eleanor's father from before the marriage, where Charles negotiated not just her dowry, but specific terms: control of her inheritance, power of attorney over her affairs, her complete legal non-existence. She was not married, she was purchased, and the price is carefully documented in Charles's own hand. Eleanor does not confront him. Confrontation would be useless. In Victorian England, a woman has no legal recourse against her husband. She cannot own property, cannot sign contracts, cannot even keep her own children if he decides otherwise. The law sees her as his possession. Confrontation would only alert him to her awareness, and awareness is her only advantage. Instead, she becomes even more perfect, even more submissive. She anticipates his needs before he voices them. She laughs at his jokes with convincing delight. She gazes at him with what appears to be absolute adoration. She plays her role so flawlessly that Charles begins to relax. He has won. She is broken. She is his. This is exactly what Eleanor needs him to believe. She begins with small actions. A word here to the household staff expressing concern about their master's health, his strange moods, his increasing paranoia. She does it with such gentle worry, such wifely devotion, that no one questions it. She is simply a concerned spouse noticing troubling changes in her husband. She befriends the wives of Charles's business associates at social functions. Not obviously, she never seeks them out, but when they speak to her, she listens with such genuine interest, such intelligent engagement, that they begin to seek her company. She never gossips about Charles, she never complains, but she asks questions, subtle questions about their husband's business dealings, about the bank, about recent troubles in the financial sector. She learns everything while appearing to learn nothing. She reconnects with her sister through carefully orchestrated chance meetings at church. Their conversations are brief, always in public, always innocent, but Eleanor passes information, names, dates, details about Charles's finances and his mistress. Her sister, unmarried and therefore possessing legal rights Eleanor lacks, begins making discreet inquiries, gathering evidence. Eleanor cultivates a friendship with Charles's physician, the same doctor who diagnosed her hysteria. She plays the grateful patient, the woman whose husband's devotion has restored her health. She asks the doctor about Charles's own health, expressing tender concern about his stress, his drinking, his increasingly erratic behavior. The doctor begins to see Charles differently, begins to wonder. Months pass. Eleanor's performance never wavers. She is the devoted wife, perhaps even more devoted than before. Charles notices her increased attentiveness and attributes it to his successful domination. He has finally molded her into what he wanted. He becomes careless. He drinks more, stays out later with his mistress, makes riskier financial decisions. After all, his domestic sphere is perfectly controlled. Eleanor is no threat. The first crack appears when Charles's business partner unexpectedly withdraws from a major investment. The partner offers no clear explanation, but Charles suspects sabotage. He rages through the house, breaking glassware, overturning furniture. Eleanor cowers convincingly, then tends to his needs with trembling hands. She brings him brandy, soothes him with soft words, and never mentions that the partner's wife is her friend from church, or that she had mentioned to this wife, in passing, concerns about her husband's judgment, how the stress seemed to be affecting his business decisions. The law sees her as his possession. Confrontation would only alert him to her awareness, and awareness is her only advantage. Instead, she becomes even more perfect, even more submissive. She anticipates his needs before he voices them. She laughs at his jokes with convincing delight. She gazes at him with what appears to be absolute adoration. She plays her role so flawlessly that Charles begins to relax. He has won. She is broken. She is his. This is exactly what Eleanor needs him to believe. She begins with small actions, a word here to the household staff, expressing concern about their master's health, his strange moods, his increasing paranoia. She does it with such gentle worry, such wifely devotion, that no one questions it. She is simply a concerned spouse noticing troubling changes in her husband. She befriends the wives of Charles's business associates at social functions. Not obviously, she never seeks them out, but when they speak to her, she listens with such genuine interest, such intelligent engagement, that they begin to seek her company. She never gossips about Charles, she never complains, but she asks questions, subtle questions about their husband's business dealings, about the bank, about recent troubles in the financial sector. She learns everything while appearing to learn nothing. She reconnects with her sister through carefully orchestrated chance meetings at church. Their conversations are brief, always in public, always innocent, but Eleanor passes information, names, dates, details about Charles's finances and his mistress. Her sister, unmarried and therefore possessing legal rights Eleanor lacks, begins making discreet inquiries, gathering evidence. Eleanor cultivates a friendship with Charles's physician, the same doctor who diagnosed her hysteria. She plays the grateful patient, the woman whose husband's devotion has restored her health. She asks the doctor about Charles's own health, expressing tender concern about his stress, his drinking, his increasingly erratic behavior. The doctor begins to see Charles differently, begins to wonder. Months pass. Eleanor's performance never wavers. She is the devoted wife, perhaps even more devoted than before. Charles notices her increased attentiveness and attributes it to his successful domination. He has finally molded her into what he wanted. He becomes careless. He drinks more, stays out later with his mistress, makes riskier financial decisions. After all, his domestic sphere is perfectly controlled. Eleanor is no threat. The first crack appears when Charles's business partner unexpectedly withdraws from a major investment. The partner offers no clear explanation, but Charles suspects sabotage. He rages through the house, breaking glassware, overturning furniture. Eleanor cowers convincingly, then tends to his needs with trembling hands. She brings him brandy, soothes him with soft words, and never mentions that the partner's wife is her friend from church, or that she had mentioned to this wife, in passing, concerns about her husband's judgment, how the stress seemed to be affecting his business decisions. The second crack comes when Charles's mistress causes a public scene, appearing at a social function and demanding he acknowledge her. The scandal is immediate and devastating. Charles's reputation, his carefully constructed image of respectability, begins to crumble. He cannot understand how she found him. He does not know that Eleanor discovered the woman's address months ago and has been sending her anonymous letters, carefully worded to inflame her jealousy and desperation, each one pushing her closer to this explosive confrontation. The third crack is financial. The bank begins investigating irregularities in Charles's accounts. Anonymous tips have been received. Documents have surfaced. Charles is suspended pending investigation. His social standing collapses. Invitations dry up. Former friends avoid him. He becomes increasingly isolated, increasingly desperate. Through it all, Eleanor remains by his side. She is his only constant, his only comfort. When he rages, she absorbs it. When he drinks himself unconscious, she covers him with blankets. When he weeps about his ruined reputation, she holds him and whispers that they will survive this together. She is the perfect wife, his only ally in a world that has turned against him. Charles never suspects that his wife is the architect of his destruction. How could he? Women do not have that kind of power, that kind of intelligence, that kind of capacity for strategy. Eleanor is just a woman, a submissive, obedient, dependent woman who loves him despite his flaws. The final move comes on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Charles returns home to find Eleanor in the drawing room with her sister, a solicitor, and 2 witnesses. On the table between them are documents, financial records, letters, testimony from servants, evidence of Charles's fraud, his debts, his mistress, his systematic manipulation and abuse. And one more document, a petition for legal separation on the grounds of cruelty and financial malfeasance, already approved by a sympathetic judge who happens to be the uncle of one of Eleanor's friends from church. Charles stares at the papers, then at Eleanor. She sits with perfect posture, hands folded, eyes downcast, the same position she has held for 3 years. But when she looks up, he sees something in her eyes that stops his breath. Not hatred, not triumph, just cold, absolute certainty. She speaks for the first time in months with her own voice, not the meek whisper he demanded. You taught me that information is power, that observation is strategy, that patience is strength. You taught me to be silent, to watch, to wait. You taught me everything I needed to destroy you, and you never noticed because you believed your own lie, that submission meant stupidity, that obedience meant defeat, that silence meant nothing. The solicitor explains the terms. Eleanor will receive her inheritance, which Charles can no longer touch. She will retain the house, purchased with her family's money. She will have a generous settlement from Charles's remaining assets. In exchange, she will not pursue criminal charges for fraud or make public the full extent of his financial crimes. He will leave London, rebuild elsewhere if he can, but his power over her ends today. Charles tries to speak, to threaten, to plead, but there is nothing left to say. Every move has been made, every piece positioned. The game ended months ago. He just did not know it. Eleanor stands, smooths her skirts, and walks to the window. Outside, the world continues. Carriages pass. People move about their lives. Nothing has changed, and everything has changed. She turns back to Charles one last time. You wanted a silent wife. You have no idea how loud silence can be when you finally learn to listen. He leaves that evening with a single trunk. The house, his former kingdom, is no longer his. Eleanor watches from the window as his carriage disappears into the London fog. She does not feel triumph. She does not feel relief. She feels something more profound. Recognition. For the first time in 3 years, she recognizes herself. The servants whisper that Mrs. Ashford has changed, become harder, less warm. But that is not quite right. She has not changed. She has simply stopped pretending. The woman they are seeing now is the woman who always existed beneath the performance, the one Charles never bothered to know. Eleanor's story spreads quietly through certain circles. Women whisper it to each other in drawing rooms and gardens. A Victorian fairy tale with a different ending. The princess who saved herself, not through rebellion or escape, but through the very tools of her oppression. Obedience as camouflage, silence as strategy, submission as the perfect disguise. Other women begin to watch their husbands differently, begin to catalog, to remember, to plan. Not all of them act, not all of them can, but they know now that the cage can be picked from the inside if you are patient enough, smart enough, silent enough. This is the power of Eleanor's reaction. Not dramatic confrontation, not theatrical rebellion, just silent, systematic, devastating precision. She dismantled her oppressor using the very system designed to protect him. She turned his weapons against him, and she did it so quietly that he never heard it coming until the trap had already closed. Years later, Eleanor Ashford lived alone in her house in London. She never remarries. She does not need to. She has her independence, her inheritance, her freedom. She hosts salons for women interested in education and reform. She funds schools and libraries. She helps other women navigate the legal complexities of escaping bad marriages. She becomes, in her own quiet way, dangerous. The kind of dangerous that changes things. When younger women ask her how she survived, how she won, she tells them the truth. I did not win by being louder than him. I won by being quieter. I did not win by being stronger. I won by appearing weaker. I did not win by breaking the rules. I won by following them so perfectly that he never saw the knife until I had already struck. This is not a story about victim and villain. This is a story about observation, about patience, about the devastating power of a woman who refuses to let her oppression define her strategy, who uses the very tools designed to silence her as her greatest weapons. Eleanor's silence was never empty. It was full of calculation, of intelligence, of absolute determination. Every moment of submission was a choice, every act of obedience a performance, every "yes, dear," a step in a longer game. The Victorian era taught women to be silent. Eleanor taught herself to make that silence into something her oppressor could never predict or control, something that would outlast him, outlive him, destroy him. And she did it without ever raising her voice. This is what manipulation looks like when it meets its match, when the manipulated becomes the manipulator, when the student surpasses the teacher, when silence stops being submission and becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. The teacup stops trembling. Eleanor's hands are steady now. They have always been steady. She just stopped pretending otherwise. In the end, Charles Ashford learned what every manipulator eventually learns, that control is an illusion, that power borrowed from oppression is fragile, that the person you underestimate is the person who will destroy you, and that sometimes the most devastating response to manipulation is not resistance, it is patience. If this story resonates with you, if you see something in Eleanor's strategy that speaks to your own experience or your own understanding of power dynamics, share it. Women throughout history have used silence as strategy, obedience as camouflage, submission as a tool of survival and eventual victory. Their stories are not always dramatic, they are often quiet, but they are always powerful. The next time someone mistakes your silence for weakness, remember Eleanor. Remember that observation is intelligence, that patience is strength, that the most dangerous opponent is the one who watches, waits, and never telegraphs their moves until victory is inevitable. This is not just a Victorian story. This is every era, every relationship where power is unequal, every moment when someone underestimates the person they are trying to control. History is full of silent revolutions, of quiet victories, of people who changed everything without anyone noticing until it was already done. Eleanor Ashford's legacy is not rebellion, it is something more subtle and more powerful. It is the knowledge that your oppressor's greatest weakness is their belief in your weakness, their certainty that you are exactly what they have tried to make you, their complete inability to imagine that your silence might be full of words they cannot hear, plans they cannot see, strategies they cannot comprehend. The Victorian woman's silent reaction to manipulation was not acceptance, it was war, conducted so quietly that the enemy never knew they had already lost. And that is the most dangerous reaction of all.